Poker at the local 1-3 cash game tables is an experience unlike any other in the world of cards. The room carries a familiar energy, a blend of quiet anticipation and friendly rivalry, where every seat is filled by a unique personality, and every chip placed on the felt tells a story. Success here is not simply a matter of knowing the rules or the odds. Instead, it is shaped by a nuanced understanding of the human element, the flow of the table, and the subtle interplay between patience and courage. To become a consistently winning player in this environment, a certain mental sharpness is required, matched by emotional steadiness and a willingness to adapt. As you settle in, you find that the game is as much about reading the room as it is about reading the cards. Awareness of your own mindset is crucial, for it shapes every decision, every bet, and every fold. Confidence must be balanced with caution. Discipline becomes a quiet companion, guiding you through moments of uncertainty and temptation. The ability to stay composed under pressure, to observe and interpret the behavior of others, and to manage your resources with care will serve you far more than any single hand or lucky draw. At these stakes, the swings can feel personal and the lessons immediate. Each session offers a chance to refine your approach, to learn from both triumphs and setbacks. The journey toward mastery is built upon small, accumulated insights and a commitment to continuous growth. With time, patterns emerge and instincts sharpen. Success in this setting is not achieved overnight, but earned through thoughtful play, self-awareness, and a genuine respect for the game's complexity. Allow yourself to absorb the atmosphere, let distractions fade, and bring your focus to the gentle rhythm of the game. The felt is before you, the chips within reach, and the opportunity to improve as a player is ever present. As the night unfolds, let the principles of sound poker guide you into a state of calm confidence, ready to meet each hand with clarity and resolve. Chapter 1: The Poker Mindset, Foundation of Success. What you carry into a poker room matters more than most players expect. Before a single card is dealt, your mental state is already shaping every decision you will make. How you think about the game and how you handle the swings can shape your results just as much as your knowledge of odds or tactics. In local 1-3 no-limit cash games, where the play can be unpredictable and the nights often run long, your mental framework is what keeps you steady. A strong poker mindset is not just about feeling confident. It's about preparing yourself to make clear-headed choices when the outcome is uncertain and the pressure feels real. In no-limit Texas Hold'em, especially at the 1-3 level, you will face ups and downs that can test anyone's resolve. Some sessions will leave you feeling unbeatable. Others might challenge your patience or self-belief. Players who tend to succeed over the long run are often the ones who prepare mentally for these moments. They do not just react to the cards or the bets. They respond with intention, letting their mindset guide them through each hand. Mental resilience is what allows you to weather the inevitable swings of poker. Those swings can stretch across hours or even days, even when your decisions are sound. If you are not ready for that, frustration can creep in. That kind of resilience helps you keep your focus on making sound decisions rather than chasing short-term results. It's often what separates more consistent players from those who let one bad hand or unlucky session throw off their entire approach. Understanding your own psychology is a big part of this. You need to know what triggers your frustration, impatience, or fear at the table. That awareness is only the starting point. Strong players also pay close attention to the tendencies of their opponents. In live 1-3 cash games, players bring all sorts of attitudes and habits to the felt. Some will get emotional after a bad beat. Others might tighten up after losing a big pot. If you can read both your own state and theirs, you will find more ways to stay ahead. Now let's look at what makes up a strong poker mindset. Emotional control is one of the most important places to start. When something does not go your way, it is easy to get frustrated or make rash decisions. In poker, that is called tilt. Tilt can turn a small loss into a big one, if you are not careful. Emotional control means keeping your reactions in check. You are still feeling the emotions, but you are not letting them dictate your play. Patience is another critical trait. In a full ring 1-3 cash game, you might go many hands without seeing a good spot. The urge to force the action, especially after a long dry spell, can be strong. But good players know that waiting for favorable situations pays off over time. Patience lets you avoid marginal spots and focus on the hands where you have a real edge. Focus ties everything together. Live cash games can be full of distractions. There is chatter at the table, chips clinking, and sometimes the games move slowly. It is easy to lose track of what is happening, or miss subtle clues about your opponents. Staying focused means keeping your attention on the game dynamics, the betting patterns, and the flow of play. When you are locked in, you spot opportunities and avoid mistakes that others might miss. These qualities work together to form the backbone of a winning approach. Emotional control helps you avoid costly errors when things go wrong. Patience keeps you out of trouble during slow stretches. Focus ensures you do not miss a beat when the action heats up. Over many sessions, these mental traits stabilize your results and keep you performing at your best. Building this mindset does not happen by accident. It takes deliberate practice, the same kind required to learn any other part of the game. One of the most effective ways to start is through self-reflection. After each session, take a few minutes to review your decisions and your emotional responses. Notice when you felt frustrated or impatient. Ask yourself what triggered those feelings and how they affected your play. Over time, this kind of honest review helps you spot patterns and address mental leaks that might be costing you money. Mental conditioning exercises can also build resilience. Visualization is one practical place to start. Before you play, imagine yourself facing tough situations. Picture how you will respond if you lose a big pot or get bluffed. This mental rehearsal prepares you to stay calm and make good decisions when the pressure is on. Mindfulness techniques, like steady breathing or brief meditations, can keep you centered during long sessions. These routines are especially useful in the sometimes chaotic environment of local poker rooms. Journaling is another practice that supports mindset development. By writing down your thoughts and observations after each session, you create a record of your progress and challenges. Over time, you will notice trends in your emotional state and see how your mindset shifts from session to session. This feedback helps you keep improving. Feedback from other players can be valuable too. Talk to people you respect, who play the same stakes. Ask them about their mental routines and how they handle swings. Sometimes an outside perspective can reveal blind spots in your own approach. The local 1-3 cash game environment has its own character. The games can be loose, the swings can be sharp, and the personalities at the table can challenge your patience. Adapting your mental training to this setting will help you stay sharp and resilient. Treat this kind of mental preparation the same way you treat any other part of your game. As you settle into your seat and stack your chips, remember that your attitude and readiness matter as much as the cards you are dealt. With each hand, you are not just playing poker. You are practicing the discipline and control that set you apart from the crowd. Take your time. Let the game come to you. Trust in your preparation and keep your mind as steady as your decisions. The rest will follow. Chapter 2: Understanding Table Dynamics. Every live poker table is its own world. It's rare to find two games that feel exactly the same, even if you walk across the room from 1-1-3 no-limit Texas Hold'em table to another. The people sitting around you shape the game in ways that go beyond the cards. Some tables feel relaxed, with players chatting and limping into pots. Others move quickly, with big raises flying back and forth. When you sit down, the first thing you want to notice is how the table breathes. Who talks and who stays quiet? Who laughs after a lost pot? Who seems locked in and focused? These small signals are the start of understanding table dynamics. That environment you're reading is shaped by the mix of personalities, tendencies, and behaviors sitting around you. In local 1-3 games, you might see a blend of recreational players who come for fun and regulars who take the game more seriously. This mix sets the pace and energy. If most players are aggressive, you will notice frequent big bets. The action will feel sharp, and pots may swell quickly. Poker players sometimes call this a tough or aggressive table. If you see more calling and checking, you are probably in a softer, more passive game. These differences matter because they shape which strategies will work best. The mood and tempo can shift even during a session, as players come and go, or as someone wins a big pot and starts playing differently. Reading the room is not just about knowing who is at your table. It is about feeling how the game is moving and what that means for your decisions. Once you get a sense of the overall environment, your next step is to watch the people who shape it. Every hand gives you a chance to observe. You want to pay attention to betting patterns. Notice who likes to raise before the flop and who prefers to limp in. Watch which players fold quickly to small bets and which ones seem to call almost anything. Over time, you will start to spot patterns. Some players bet large amounts often. These tend to be aggressive players who use bet sizing to pressure the table. Some check and call more often, rarely betting or raising on their own. These are the passive players, and they will often let others control the action. Physical tells and verbal cues can give you extra information. Some players talk more when they are strong. Others go silent when they are bluffing. You might notice someone fidgeting or staring too long at their chips before calling. These patterns may not always mean the same thing, but watching for them helps you build a profile for each opponent. Try to stay patient and gather information over many hands. Poker rewards patience. Most players reveal their tendencies over time if you're watching closely. You do not have to put every opponent into a neat box, but it helps to think in broad categories. Is this player loose or tight? Do they play many hands or wait for premium ones? Do they bet and raise often, or do they tend to check and call? These labels are not perfect, but they guide your choices in close spots. You will notice that some players change gears, becoming more aggressive after losing a big hand or tightening up after a scare. Your job is to keep watching and update your read as things shift. The real skill comes in what you do with all this information. Once you recognize the table's energy and your opponent's habits, you can start to adjust your own strategy. There is no single approach that works for every table. Flexibility is what sets winning players apart in live cash games. If you are facing several passive players who call too often, you might increase your value bet sizes. You can be more selective with bluffs because these opponents do not like folding. On the other hand, if the table is full of aggressive players You may tighten up your starting hand selection. You might wait for stronger hands and let them do the betting for you. Adapting does not mean changing your plan every hand. It means staying alert and being willing to shift when the table changes. Maybe a new player sits down and starts raising every pot. Maybe the mood gets tense after a big confrontation. These moments are your chance to reassess. You might slow down for a few orbits, watch how the new energy settles, and then pick your spots with fresh information. The best players make small adjustments as they go, always grounding their choices in what they see and hear, not on impulse or tilt. Over time, reading the table tends to feel more natural. You start to sense when the atmosphere is right for a big move or when it is better to wait. Each session is a new puzzle, and the pieces keep shifting as the night goes on. Let yourself settle in. Trust your observations. You're always adding to what you know. The ability to adapt in real time is one of the clearest separators between players who struggle and players who find consistency. When you stay tuned to the rhythm of the room, each decision becomes a little clearer, and the path to long-term profit gets a little smoother. Chapter 3: Emotional Control. Keeping cool under pressure. You can read the table perfectly and still lose control of the session. Not because of the cards, because of what's happening inside your head. Frustration builds quietly. Disappointment settles in before you notice it. And by the time your judgment starts to slip, it's often already too late to catch it cleanly. That shift has a name. It's called tilt. It doesn't always look like rage or frustration. Sometimes it's impatience. Sometimes it's a slow drift away from your usual discipline. You might start betting more than the situation calls for, chasing losses, or playing hands you'd normally fold. The trigger can be a single bad beat, or just a gradual build-up of small annoyances. The danger with tilt is that it does not just cost you one hand. When you are on tilt, your brain shifts into a stress mode. The part of your mind that handles careful planning and logic takes a back seat. You start making decisions for reasons that have nothing to do with the actual situation. Over time, this leads to bigger swings and steeper losses. Even strong technical knowledge tends to break down when emotions take over. You will notice the signs if you pay attention. Maybe your heart is racing after a tough hand. Maybe you feel the urge to make a big move just to prove a point. When you catch yourself acting on impulse instead of intention, that is the first signal. Recognizing the moment you start to slip is the most important step. If you can spot tilt early, you have a chance to stop the spiral before it gets costly. Emotional control is not about never feeling anything, but knowing when your emotions are affecting your play. Once you can see tilt for what it is, you can start to manage it. There are practical ways to keep your cool at the table. One of the simplest is to focus on your breathing. When you feel tension rising, pause and breathe in slowly for a count of 4. Then breathe out for a count of 6. Do that a few times. It helps settle your nerves and gives your mind a little space to reset. You do not need a special routine. Just a few deep breaths can break the pattern of stress and help you regain focus. Another technique is mindfulness. This is about paying attention to what you are feeling without judging it. If you notice frustration or anxiety, just acknowledge it. Let yourself feel it, then gently bring your attention back to the present. Some players use a quick body scan. They notice the weight of their hands on the table or the sound of chips in the pot. These small grounding moments keep you anchored in the here and now. instead of getting stuck in what just happened or worrying about what might come next. Taking structured breaks is another powerful tool. After a tough hand or a long stretch at the table, step away for a few minutes. Walk around, stretch, or simply sit quietly. This helps prevent emotional fatigue and gives your mind a chance to recover. Even a short break can make a big difference in how you handle the next decision. Positive self-talk can also help. If you catch yourself thinking, "I always lose in these spots," try shifting to something more supportive. Remind yourself of times you have played well or bounced back from a setback. Simple phrases like, "I am focused on making good decisions," or "I have handled this before," can interrupt negative thinking and restore confidence. You don't have to use every technique at once. Try a few and see what fits your style. The goal is to have something ready before emotions start to build. With practice, these habits become part of your routine, the same way reading the table or managing your stack becomes automatic over time. Emotional control does more than prevent mistakes in the moment. Over time, it shapes your entire approach to poker. Players who manage their emotions tend to make steadier decisions, even when the session is moving against them. They do not let a bad beat turn into a string of poor choices. Instead, they treat setbacks as part of the process and look for ways to learn from them. This kind of resilience tends to separate players who improve steadily from those who stay stuck. Many top professionals talk about focusing on the process, not just the results. They pay attention to playing their best game, not chasing every win or fearing every loss. This mindset helps them stay balanced, even when the cards do not cooperate. By building emotional regulation into their daily routine, they are able to handle the swings of high-stakes games without losing their edge. Evidence from sports psychology and behavioral research suggests that emotional regulation supports better decision-making under pressure. Players who manage their emotional state tend to make fewer impulsive decisions and maintain more consistent judgment across a long session. Managing your emotional state isn't a secondary concern. It's a practical edge that compounds over time, one good decision at a time. If you want to succeed in poker for the long haul, make emotional control a core part of your game. Let yourself feel the highs and lows, but do not let them steer your decisions. Come back to your breath, your focus, and your process. In the quiet moments between hands, you will find the clarity you need to play your best. Let each decision stand on its own, and trust that steady discipline will carry you through whatever the game brings. Chapter 4: Identifying Player Types and Tells. Every table has a rhythm to it. Some players fold hand after hand, then suddenly arrive in a pot with purpose and force. Others are always there, calling quietly, waiting. You can feel the difference before you can name it. The skill is learning to name it and then use it. Let's talk about the main player types you will run into in live no-limit Texas Hold'em cash games. The first is the tight aggressive player. This type plays fewer hands than most, but when they enter a pot, they tend to bet and raise with real purpose. You won't find them chasing weak draws or calling just to see what happens. Their actions usually mean strength, so it often pays to give their bets some credit. On the other end sits the loose passive player. You'll spot them quickly in most 1-3 games. They call almost every raise and see flop after flop, with hands most players would fold without thinking. When the betting gets heavy, they still don't push back. They call, and they wait, hoping to connect. That patience to observe over a few orbits is usually all it takes to identify them. Plenty of players fall somewhere between these two types, and many shift their style as the session progresses. Someone might start out tight and open up once they're comfortable. Others loosen after a big win, or tighten up after a tough loss. That's why watching one hand isn't enough. It's the repeated behaviors across many hands that reveal the tendencies you can actually use. When you can categorize your opponents early, you can start adjusting your strategy right away. Against a tight, aggressive player, you might fold your weaker hands more often and look for spots to trap when you have genuine strength. Against a loose, passive player, you can value bet more thinly and expect to get called by worse hands. The key is staying alert and being willing to update your reads as new information arrives. Nobody plays exactly the same way all night. These categories are guides, not rules. Once you have a sense of who you're playing against, you can start looking for the smaller signals that give away even more. In live games, people reveal information in ways they're often not aware of. A tell can come from a physical gesture, a betting pattern, or even the way someone speaks. Spotting one is like finding an extra clue when you already have a partial picture. Some tells come from posture. Maybe someone sits up straight and stares intensely at the board when they are strong. Maybe they suddenly avoid eye contact when they are nervous. You might see a player throw their chips into the pot with extra force, trying to look tough when they are actually bluffing. Or you notice someone hesitating before betting, which could mean uncertainty, or sometimes be a deliberate act to confuse you. These signals do not always mean the same thing for every player, so context matters a lot. Speech patterns can also reveal information. Some players tend to talk more when they're relaxed and grow quieter when the pressure builds. Others might try to sound confident with jokes or bravado, but their voice wavers when the stakes get high. Betting rhythm can be just as revealing. A quick bet can sometimes signal confidence, but it can also be a bluff meant to project strength. A long pause before a bet might reflect genuine indecision, or it could be a deliberate act to confuse you. What matters is seeing if a player repeats these actions in similar spots over several hands. It is important to watch for clusters of tells rather than relying on a single moment. If a player always avoids eye contact when they are weak, and you see them do it again, that information becomes much more useful. If someone's chip handling changes only when they have good hands, you can start to trust that pattern. But if you see a tell only once, use caution. People act differently for many reasons. Maybe they are tired, distracted, or just trying something new. Always combine physical and behavioral observations with what you know about their playing style. One of the most effective ways to gather these clues is to watch quietly and blend in. You do not want to make anyone uncomfortable or draw attention to your own focus. Just keep your eyes open, listen to the table talk, and notice how people behave as the hands play out. Over time, you will build a mental catalog of what each regular tends to do in certain spots. Over time, that catalog can be more useful than any starting hand chart. Once you start collecting this information, the real skill is knowing how and when to use it. If you have pegged a player as loose passive and see them suddenly start betting big, you have to ask whether their behavior is changing for good or just in this one hand. If you spot a tell that lines up with what you already know about their style, you can use it to justify a call or a fold that you might not otherwise make. But if the signal contradicts your previous read, it is time to slow down and gather more data before acting. Flexibility is the heart of good live poker. It is not enough to label someone and stick to that, read all night. The best players adjust as the session evolves. Maybe a tight, aggressive player gets frustrated and starts taking risks. Maybe a loose, passive player finally builds some confidence and starts raising more often. If you notice these shifts early, you can adapt your own ranges, bet sizing and calling frequencies to stay ahead. In a 1-3 game, this might mean betting a little bigger when you sense weakness, or tightening up when you spot new aggression. Combining player profiling with teleobservation gives you a deeper edge. Use both tools together. If you see a familiar betting rhythm from a player you have already categorized, you can make more precise decisions. If someone's physical tells confirm what you expect from their type, you can lean in and press your advantage. When the signals do not match, that is your cue to be cautious, gather more information, and stay patient. Active observation is a skill you can build every time you sit down. It's not just about watching the cards. It's about paying attention to the people, the patterns, and the small details that make each table different. Over time, you'll start to see the game in layers. Each session adds something new to what you already know. The more you watch, the more you learn to trust your reads and recognize when to adjust. That habit of quiet, careful attention is what makes your approach flexible and hard to predict. Take your time. Let each hand show you something worth keeping. Chapter 5: Bankroll Management for 1-3 Cash Games. When you start taking poker seriously, one of the first things you need to think about is how you handle your money for the game. If you want to play 1-3 no-limit Texas Hold'em cash games over the long run, you need a plan for managing your poker funds. This is not just about keeping track of wins and losses. It is about setting aside a specific amount of money that is only for poker. That way, you protect yourself from losing more than you can afford and keep your everyday expenses separate from your play at the tables. Keeping that separation intact means a tough night at the card room stays at the card room. It's surprisingly common to underestimate how quickly losses can accumulate without a clear structure in place. When you treat your poker money as a separate pool, you can handle swings at the table without worrying about whether you will have enough left for the week's essentials. This habit makes it easier to avoid desperate or emotional decisions, because the money at the table isn't tied to anything you need elsewhere. Keeping that boundary clear also makes it much easier to track your real results. You can look back over a month or several months and get an honest read on where your game actually stands. This kind of record keeping becomes much more reliable when you're disciplined about keeping poker money separate. It also helps you see patterns in your play, which can guide your decisions about when to move up, move down, or take a break. There is another benefit to this separation. When you treat poker as its own investment, you start to see each session as part of a bigger picture. This mindset shift helps you take the game more seriously. You're not treating each session as a gamble. You're managing risk with a longer horizon in mind. That shift in thinking tends to lead to better habits and more consistent results over time. Now, let us talk about how much you should set aside for your 1-3 cash game bankroll. A common guideline is to have at least 20 buy-ins for the games you play. Since a typical buy-in for 1-3 is around $200 to $300, 20 buy-ins at the lower end puts a starting bankroll at around $4,000. At the higher end, that figure rises to around $6,000. Some players prefer to keep as many as 30 buy-ins, which puts the figure closer to $6,000 to $9,000, depending on the buy-in size they use. The right number for you depends on how comfortable you are with risk and how wild your local games tend to be. If your 1-3 game has lots of loose, aggressive players and big pots, you might want to keep more than 20 buy-ins to handle the extra swings. On the other hand, if your table is mostly tight and cautious, you could feel fine with a bit less. Your own tolerance matters too. Some players sleep better knowing they have plenty of cushion. Others are willing to play with less, but that comes with more risk of having to stop playing if things go wrong for a while. It is also important to know what to do if your bankroll drops below your target. In 1-3 games, you might not always have the option to move down in stakes at your local card room. Still, many players will take a break or look for a softer game if their bankroll shrinks. That way they avoid risking their last few buy-ins and give themselves a chance to rebuild. Being willing to adjust is part of the process. The goal is to protect your ability to keep showing up, especially when things aren't going your way. There's no single formula that works for everyone. What matters is that you're paying attention. As you log more sessions and get to know your local game, you'll develop a clearer feel for how much cushion you actually need. The important thing is to make adjustments before you're forced to. When you follow these habits, you set yourself up for the long run. The biggest benefit is that you can keep playing through the inevitable downswings that come with poker. Even strong, experienced players go through losing stretches that can last weeks or longer. If you have a dedicated bankroll, you are not forced out of the game just because you hit a cold run. You can keep showing up, learning, and making adjustments. Having enough bankroll also helps you make clearer decisions at the table. When you know you have plenty of buy-ins behind you, you are less likely to panic or chase losses. You can focus on making the right decision in each spot, rather than worrying about the money behind it. That kind of calm, rational approach tends to separate players who stay in the game from those who burn through their funds early. In the end, disciplined bankroll management is what lets you treat poker as a real pursuit, not just a hobby or a gamble. You give yourself the freedom to keep improving, to weather the tough times, and to take advantage of good opportunities when they come. Each session becomes part of a bigger journey, and you are in control of how far you want to go. Let that sense of security settle in as you take your seat. The chips in front of you represent more than just tonight's session. They are your ticket to a long, steady path in the game. Chapter 6: Bet Sizing and Pot Control. Every chip in front of you tells a story before a single card is dealt. How you use those chips, especially when deciding how much to bet, will shape the flow of each hand. The size of your bet is not just a number. It is a message to your opponents and a lever for controlling the pot. The goal is for bet sizing to be deliberate. You are making choices that serve a purpose, not just tossing chips into the pot. There are a few main reasons you might choose a certain bet size. Sometimes you are trying to get value from a strong hand. Other times you want to protect your hand against draws, or apply pressure so your opponent folds. Often you are aiming for a balanced approach that does not give away the strength of your hand through your sizing patterns. Each goal asks for a different approach, and the right bet size helps you get there. The amount you bet directly affects the size of the pot. When you make a larger bet, the pot grows faster, and future bets become bigger. This changes the odds your opponent gets when deciding whether to call. If you bet small, you offer your opponents better odds to see another card. If you bet big, you make it more expensive for them to continue. This trade-off sits at the center of most decisions you'll face at the table. How you size your bets should also match the situation. On dry, uncoordinated boards, where it's less likely someone has a strong draw, smaller bets tend to work well. These are boards like ace-high, with low, disconnected cards. In these spots, betting about 1/3 to 1/2 of the pot is common. On wet coordinated boards with lots of possible draws, bigger bets are generally a stronger choice. Here, a bet of 2/3 to 3/4 of the pot is more standard. These larger bets charge drawing hands more and protect your value. Before the flop, the size of your raise matters as well. A common open raise in a 1-3 cash game tends to be somewhere between 3 and 4 times the big blind. If there are limpers ahead of you, it's common to add roughly 1 additional big blind per limper on top of your standard raise size. This tends to keep your pre-flop strategy consistent and can help you avoid giving away information about your hand strength. If your open sizes or continuation bets change wildly based on your cards, sharp players will catch on. To avoid this, try to keep your bet sizes tied to the board and the situation, not just your own cards. Bet sizing is also about clarity. If you make your bets clear and consistent, you are less likely to give away tells through your sizing. Opponents will have a harder time figuring out what you hold. When your sizing shifts noticeably with your hand strength, attentive opponents will start to notice. They'll pick up on patterns quickly and adjust how they play against you. Staying balanced makes it much tougher for them to read you. Managing the size of the pot is another important skill. Sometimes you want to build a big pot, especially when you are confident you have the best hand. Other times, you want to keep the pot small, particularly when you are holding a marginal hand or the board is dangerous. Strategic bet sizing lets you do both. By betting smaller, you keep the pot manageable and limit your risk if things go wrong. This approach is worth practicing until it becomes instinct. Pot control is especially useful when you are not sure where you stand. If you have a medium-strength hand, betting small or checking can help you avoid building a huge pot, where you could end up facing a tough decision. On the turn, it is often wise to check medium-strength hands and save your bets for strong hands or well-timed bluffs. This makes river decisions easier and keeps you from risking too many chips with hands that are unlikely to win a big showdown. When you bet your entire range on a dry board using small sizes, you include many weak hands and bluffs. Because the board is not likely to help anyone, small bets put less money at risk and allow you to bet more frequently. On coordinated boards, the story changes. Now only your strongest hands or well-chosen bluffs should use large bets. This approach puts pressure on opponents who are chasing draws, forcing them to pay more to see another card. Be careful not to overbet the pot with hands that are not likely to be best by the river. If you build a big pot with a marginal holding, you can end up getting called by stronger hands and losing more than you should. Thoughtful bet sizing helps you avoid these traps and keeps your losses under control when things do not go your way. In local 1-3 cash games, you'll often notice that many players tend to call more than they should, especially before the flop and on early streets. When you have a strong hand, betting around 3/4 of the pot can be effective against that kind of player. You can get value from players who will call with weaker holdings. Still, you need to pay attention to the board and your opponent's tendencies. If the board is dry, smaller value bets let opponents call with marginal hands. On wet boards, larger bets protect your strong hands and make it costly for opponents to chase draws. The way players behave at your table should guide your sizing decisions. Against loose passive players, larger value bets tend to get paid off more often. If you are up against tight aggressive players who fold most weak hands but play back when they sense weakness, smaller bets or checks with marginal hands help you avoid tough spots. Stack depth shapes your sizing decisions too. When everyone has deep stacks, larger bets can build pots with strong hands and apply pressure with well-chosen bluffs. When stacks are shallower, smaller bets help you avoid committing too much in marginal spots. It's worth keeping an eye on how much money is left behind, not just what's already in the pot. Flexibility is key. You need to adjust as the game evolves. If you notice players tightening up after a few big pots, you might switch to smaller bets and focus on value. If the table gets loose and aggressive, you might use larger bets to maximize value with strong hands and protect against draws. Strong players tend to keep adapting, rather than locking into a single approach. As the action slows, and you watch the chips move around the table, you start to see how each bet size shapes the hand. You're not just reacting. You're making careful choices that guide the action and protect your stack. With each pot, you learn a little more about how to balance caution and aggression. Let yourself settle into the rhythm of the game. The more you practice thoughtful sizing, the more control you'll feel over every hand you play. Chapter 7. Positional Awareness. Leveraging your seat. Your seat at the table has a relationship to the dealer button, and that relationship follows you through every hand you play. Each seat has a specific relationship to the dealer button, and that relationship shapes every hand you play. The order of action rotates clockwise each hand as the button moves, and where you sit in that sequence shapes every decision you make. The blinds sit to the left of the button and act first after the flop. Early position follows, where players must act with very little to go on. Middle position offers a bit more context, but still leaves room for uncertainty. Late position, which includes the cutoff and the button, acts last on every street after the flop. The core reason position carries so much weight is the information it gives you before you act. When you act early, you must decide without knowing what the majority of your opponents plan to do. When you act late, you get to see how others react to the board and the betting, which gives you a valuable edge. This structure affects everything from which hands you should play, to how you size your bets, to how you respond to aggression. Understanding your seat and the flow of action is essential for building a winning strategy in cash games. When you find yourself in late position, you have a powerful advantage. Acting last in a betting round means you get to see how everyone else responds before making your move. If the players ahead of you check or make small bets, you can read that as a sign of possible weakness, though that reading can be wrong. If someone bets big, you can decide whether your hand is strong enough to continue, or if it is better to let it go. This extra information allows you to make more accurate decisions and avoid costly mistakes. Late position also gives you more control over the pot size. If you want to keep the pot small, you can check behind or call carefully. If you want to build the pot, you can raise after seeing how others act. This flexibility lets you adjust your strategy in real time, making it easier to manage risk and maximize value from your strong hands. Acting last also lets you apply pressure on players who've already committed to a line. If you've shown aggression earlier in the session, players in earlier seats may think twice before putting chips in without a strong hand. This can sometimes lead them to fold hands they'd otherwise continue with, or to act with less confidence than they'd like. Over a long enough sample, players who use late position well tend to show better results than those who don't. The ability to gather more information and control the flow of each hand is a key reason why experienced players often talk about the importance of playing more hands from late seats. It's not just about the cards you're dealt. It's about using where you sit to make sharper decisions than the players around you. On the other hand, early position comes with real challenges. When you act first, you have the least information about what your opponents plan to do. You might face multiple players who can raise, call, or fold after you, and you have no way to know their intentions before you act. That uncertainty means you'll want to be more selective with the hands you choose to play from those seats. In practice, this often means folding weaker and more speculative hands that you might play from later seats. The risk of being raised or facing tough decisions post-flop is higher when you are out of position, so discipline tends to matter more here than in any other seat. If you do enter a pot from early position, you want to have a hand that can stand up to pressure from the rest of the table. The aim is to stay out of situations where you're acting first on every street, without enough information to feel reasonably sure about your decisions. Adjusting your play based on where you sit is one of the clearest ways to improve your results over time. In early position, focus on stronger hands and step away from marginal spots. As you move closer to the button, you can widen your range and take on more calculated risk. This approach helps you manage the disadvantages of acting first, while taking full advantage of the benefits when you act last. Over time, you will develop a sense for how position shapes the entire flow of a hand. Each seat brings a different set of trade-offs. By staying aware of where you are in the betting order, you can make more informed decisions and avoid many of the pitfalls that catch less experienced players off guard. The more you pay attention to where the button sits, the more each hand starts to make sense. Your starting range shifts. Your reads sharpen. The seat you're in isn't just a physical spot at the table. It's part of every decision you make. Chapter 8: Handling Variance and Downswings. In a local 1-3 no-limit Texas Hold'em cash game, you might notice that even when you make what feels like the right play, the chips do not always move your way. Some nights you will see a player hit a lucky river, or you will watch a big pot slide across the table after a long, tense showdown. This is not just bad fortune, or a sign that skill does not matter. What you're experiencing is variance. Variance in these games comes from the random way cards are dealt, and how players act over a limited stretch of hands. You can play for hours, make strong decisions with premium hands, and still find yourself losing chips. Sometimes you will hold a strong hand, get your money in ahead, and watch your opponent catch a card they needed. Other times, you might see a less experienced player win several big pots in a row, even when their choices were not optimal. These swings are not a verdict on your ability. They are simply the natural result of short-term luck and the constant shuffle of the deck. If you play enough hands at your local card room, you will see both winning streaks and downswings. In sessions where you're playing 20 to 25 hands per hour, it's common to walk away ahead one night and behind the next, even when your approach stays the same. Over a few hours, results can be shaped by a single big pot or an unlucky run of cards. When you lose with pocket aces to a set, it stings. But this kind of outcome is part of the game, not a sign that you are doing something wrong. The key is to recognize that variance tends to be present in every stretch of play, and that even skilled players can't escape these ups and downs in the short run. When you hit a downswing, it's easy to get frustrated or start questioning your approach. The important thing is to keep your focus on the quality of your decisions, not just the size of your stack at the end of the night. Instead of measuring success by whether you won or lost in a single session, look at how well you stuck to your process. Did you choose the right hands to play from each position? Did you size your bets thoughtfully and adapt to the table's rhythm? These are the habits that matter over time. One practical way to handle a rough patch is to review your hands after each session. Take a quiet moment to think about your key decisions. Did you let the cards push you off your plan, or did you stay disciplined? By stepping back and evaluating your choices, you can separate the impact of variance from the quality of your play. That kind of reflection helps you spot patterns and reinforce good habits. It also keeps you grounded, so a few unlucky hands don't shake your confidence or push you toward tilt. During a downswing, motivation can start to fade. It helps to remind yourself that every session is just one small part of a much larger journey. Stay focused on making the best possible decision in each hand. Pay attention to your ranges and your bet sizing, especially when the cards seem to be running cold. The more you can anchor yourself in process-oriented play, the less you will be swayed by the inevitable swings of fortune. Over time, this steady approach tends to help you weather the hard stretches and make the most of the good ones. To truly succeed in poker, you need to see the game as a long-term endeavor. The results of any single session, or even a string of sessions, are only a small piece of the bigger picture. What matters is how your decisions add up over hundreds, or even thousands of hands. That's where expected value does its work. A decision with positive expected value sets you up to come out ahead over a large sample, even when the short-term result goes against you. Patience becomes your ally in this process. If you can sit through a tough stretch and keep making strong decisions, you give yourself a meaningful advantage over players who chase quick results or let short-term setbacks cloud their judgment. Consistency matters just as much. Applying your positional awareness and sticking to your process, hand after hand and session after session, tends to lead to better outcomes as the effects of variance even out over time. Let yourself settle into the rhythm of the game. Trust that the swings will smooth out over time. Your commitment to quality play is what drives your results in the long run. Each session is a chance to practice patience and resilience. As you build these habits, you will find yourself better prepared for whatever the cards bring, and your confidence will start to come from the strength of your decisions, not just the size of your stack. With this mindset, you will be ready to face the challenges of live cash games with clarity and resolve, no matter what the deck holds for you tonight. Chapter 9. Mastering the Art of Bluffing. Every bet you make tells a story. Sometimes that story is true. Sometimes it is not. The space between what your opponents believe and what you actually hold is where the most powerful plays in poker are made. Bluffing starts in this space between what is known and what is hidden. The game is built on incomplete information. You know your own hand, but you can only guess at what your opponents hold. This uncertainty is the foundation that makes bluffing possible. Every time you bet or raise, you are telling a story. Sometimes that story is honest. Sometimes it is not. Bluffing is about representing a stronger hand than you actually have, with the goal of getting others to fold. What makes this move so effective is the pressure it puts on your opponents to make decisions with limited information. When faced with a big bet and the risk of losing a significant pot, many players tend to fold hands that could beat yours simply because they believe the story you are telling. The key to successful bluffing is credibility. If your bets look like they could come from the same hands you would play for value, your opponents have a harder time calling you down. Consistent bet sizing and timing help build this trust. When your bluffs look identical to how you play your strongest hands, opponents will start to give you credit. This does not mean you need to bluff often. It means your bluffs should fit into the overall picture you present. When your bluffs land, you start to shift the dynamic at the table. Opponents may become more cautious when you bet, folding more often to your aggression. Some might over-adjust and start calling you down lighter, trying to catch you in the act. Either way, you are influencing the flow of future hands. Each successful bluff plants a seed of uncertainty in your opponent's minds. Over time, this makes your value bets more effective and gives you more control over the game's rhythm. Bluffing is not wild or reckless. It is a calculated move, used to manipulate perceptions and create opportunities. When you approach it as a tool rather than a gamble, you give yourself the power to shape the action and keep your opponents guessing. To know when to bluff, You need to pay close attention to your opponents and the way the table is playing. Not every spot is right for a bluff. Some players are more likely to let go of their hands, while others will call you down with almost anything. Start by watching how often each player enters pots. Tight players tend to fold under pressure, unless they have something solid. That makes them reasonable targets when you pick the right spot. These are often good targets for well-timed bluffs. Keep in mind that when a tight player does call, there is a good chance they have something solid. Bluffing into players who tend to only stick around with the top of their range is often a costly spot. Loose passive players tend to call you down without much hesitation. They do not need a strong reason to stay in a hand. Bluffing into that kind of player wastes chips that could be earned elsewhere. If you see someone calling down with bottom pair or chasing every draw, save your bluffs for someone else. Player types are only part of the picture. The way the whole table is playing matters just as much. If the action keeps checking around to late position, it often means nobody feels confident about their hand. That is often a good spot to represent strength and take down the pot with a well-sized bet. Pay attention to how many players are in the hand. The fewer opponents you face, the better your chances of getting a bluff through. When you are up against just one or two players, there is less chance someone has a strong hand. Watch for patterns in betting and decision-making. If a player folds to every turn bet, or gives up when faced with aggression, you have found a promising target. If the table is playing cautiously, and pots are staying small, people are waiting for strong hands before committing chips. This creates more space for you to apply pressure and pick your spots for a bluff. Not every bluff will work, and that is part of the game. The goal is to recognize when the odds are in your favor and to act with a clear plan. By studying the flow of the table and the habits of your opponents, you can spot those moments when a well-timed bluff is most likely to succeed. Every bluff you attempt comes with risk. You are putting chips on the line when you know your actual hand is behind. The reward is the pot you might win if your opponent folds, but the risk is losing more if you get called. Before you pull the trigger, weigh what you stand to gain against what you could lose. Ask yourself if your story makes sense. Ask if your opponent is likely to fold. Ask if the pot is worth the risk. Your table image plays a big role here. If you have built a reputation for playing solid, straightforward poker, your bluffs will get more respect. Over time, a consistent approach makes your bets harder to read. Opponents who have seen you show down strong hands are more likely to hesitate before calling your big bets without something substantial. This is how credibility pays off. The longer you maintain a steady image, the more leverage you have when you decide to bluff. Watch how your opponents respond when your big bets get through. If they start calling you down lighter or seem suspicious, it is time to tighten up and reduce your bluffing frequency. On the other hand, if your big bets keep getting through, you may have room to keep applying pressure. Adjusting as the session goes on gives you a better chance of staying ahead. Discipline is what keeps you from overdoing it. Bluffing too often can quickly cost you control of your stack. You want your bluffs to have purpose, to fit into your overall plan, and to be backed by solid reasoning. When you feel the urge to force a bluff out of frustration or boredom, remind yourself to wait for the right spot. Self-awareness is your best defense against costly mistakes. With time, you will find that bluffing is less about bravado and more about timing, observation, and patience. You start to see the game as a series of shifting opportunities. Some sessions call for more pressure. Others call for patience. The table will usually tell you which one it is. The most effective bluffs feel natural. They fit your image. They come from a place of calm confidence. When you find that balance, you will likely start winning more pots you have no business winning, and the game will begin to feel more open. Settle into that rhythm and let it carry you through the session. Your instincts sharpen every time you sit down and observe. The right moment will show itself when you are paying attention. Chapter 10: Adjusting Strategy Based on Opponent's Emotions. The cards don't tell the whole story at a live table. The people sitting around you carry just as much information, and sometimes more. Every player brings a set of emotions with them, and those feelings can show up in subtle or obvious ways. Sometimes it is a quick shake of the hands when the pot gets big. Sometimes it is a deep sigh or a quiet mutter after a tough loss. These moments aren't random. They're signals. If you pay close attention, you can pick up on these cues and use them to guide your decisions. Emotions can drive people to make choices they would not make if they were thinking clearly. A player who just lost a big pot might act out of frustration, calling bets they would usually fold. Someone who is anxious might start playing too tight, folding hands that are actually strong enough to continue. Excitement can show up as fast, eager bets. Anxiety often reveals itself through small physical tells. Shaking hands, for example, tends to show up when a player is under pressure or holding a strong hand. You will see plenty of different emotional states at the table. Some players get frustrated after a string of losses. Others become visibly excited when they hit a big hand or win a few pots in a row. There are players who get anxious when the action picks up, and others who become overconfident after a long run of good luck. Each of these states can change the way a person plays. When you learn to spot these shifts, you start to notice patterns. Over time, you recognize that certain players react the same way every time they get frustrated or anxious. These patterns are valuable because they can help you anticipate when someone is more likely to play poorly. Patterns are not always obvious at first. It takes steady observation and patience to connect the dots. You want to watch for small changes in behavior. Maybe someone who normally bets in a calm, steady way suddenly starts splashing chips into the pot. Maybe a player who is usually chatty goes silent after losing a big hand. These are the kinds of details that can tip you off to an emotional shift. When you see someone acting out of character, it is often a sign that their decisions are being influenced by emotion rather than logic. Once you start to read these emotional cues, you can use them to adjust your strategy. Let's look at what happens when a player goes on tilt. In live no-limit Texas Hold'em cash games, tilt often shows up as aggressive or irrational betting right after a loss. In live no-limit Texas Hold'em cash games, tilt often shows up as aggressive or irrational betting right after a loss. When you spot someone on tilt, there's often an opportunity worth considering. You might widen your value range, since tilted players tend to call down lighter or chase draws they'd normally fold. Frustration can make people play looser. If you see a player who just lost a big hand start to call more bets or chase draws more often, their frustration is guiding their choices. This is a good time to tighten up your hand selection and value. Bet your strong hands. You don't want to start bluffing wildly, but you can consider increasing your aggression in spots where you're probably ahead. Overconfident players can create another kind of opening. When someone is riding a hot streak and starts to believe they can't lose, they'll tend to call with weaker hands. That's often a good time to bet for value, since they're more likely to pay you off. Timing is important. You do not want to overcommit against someone who is unstable, because their play can swing from reckless to cautious in just a few hands. Emotional states can change quickly. A player who is tilting now might calm down after a break or a lucky win. That is why you need to stay flexible and keep checking in on how your opponents are behaving. The goal is to adapt in real time, making small adjustments as you pick up new information. When you see someone start to recover their composure, it is time to return to a more balanced approach. There are times when it makes sense to target a specific player who is showing clear signs of emotional vulnerability. Maybe they just took a tough beat and are now calling every raise. In these moments, you can pick your spots to steal pots or value bet lighter than usual. Still, you want to avoid getting drawn into wild confrontations just because someone else is out of control. Stick to adjustments that make sense for the situation, and remember that not every display of emotion leads to a profitable spot. While you are watching others, it is just as important to manage your own emotions. Losing your composure can make you predictable and easy to exploit. If you notice yourself feeling frustrated, anxious, or angry, try to pause and take a few deep breaths. Sometimes it helps to step away from the table for a few minutes after a tough hand. This short break can help you reset your focus and return with a clearer mindset. Being able to recognize your own triggers for tilt is a big advantage. Maybe you know that you get frustrated after losing a big pot, or you start to rush decisions when you are tired. Self-awareness lets you catch these patterns early before they turn into costly mistakes. Many players find it helpful to build a small routine around emotional discipline. It doesn't have to be complicated. Checking in with yourself between hands or setting a quiet cue to refocus can be enough. Emotional control is what keeps your decisions steady, even when the action gets intense. Keeping your composure helps you avoid falling into predictable patterns that others might exploit. Over time, this discipline leads to more consistent results and a stronger presence at the table. Over time, players may start to notice that you don't tilt easily, and that reputation can make you a tougher opponent. The ability to read and manage emotions is a skill that pays off every time you play. Some nights you will spot a player on tilt and adjust on the fly. Other nights you will catch yourself before a mistake and settle back into a calm, focused rhythm. That steady presence, both in watching others and managing yourself, is what sets experienced players apart. Let yourself notice the subtle shifts, keep your reactions measured, and trust that each session will teach you something new about the mental game. Let your attention rest on the people as much as the cards. That is often where the real edge quietly takes shape. Chapter 11. Starting Hands. A Selective Approach. Discipline at the poker table tends to start with a calm mind. When you are steady inside, you can make thoughtful decisions, hand after hand. This steady approach is what lets you build a strategy that lasts longer than any single session. One of the first places this discipline shows up is in the hands you choose to play. Every hand you are dealt is a decision point. Some you play, most you fold. That simple act of choosing which hands to enter shapes your entire experience at the table. In a local 1-3 cash game, your ability to be selective with starting hands often sets the tone for your long-term results. There are 1,326 possible two-card combinations in Texas Hold'em. Out of all those, only a small fraction are consistently worth playing. The chance of being dealt any pocket pair is roughly 1 in 17, or around 6%. Even fewer hands are truly premium. When you play only your strongest hands, you are taking the first step toward long-term profitability. This is what tight play looks like in practice. Some players play many hands, hoping to catch something unexpected. That loose approach can feel rewarding in the short term, but it exposes you to more risk. Marginal hands often cost you extra bets when you are behind, and win only small pots when you are ahead. Over many sessions, the cost of chasing with weak holdings adds up. Selectivity is your main defense. By folding more hands than you play, you avoid tricky spots and reduce losses from hands that look good at first but rarely hold up. It takes patience to fold hand after hand, waiting for the right moment. But this patience is the backbone of a solid game. Strong players aren't just lucky. They tend to be consistent and patient, building their stacks one careful decision at a time. A disciplined approach to starting hands isn't only about avoiding mistakes. It's also about being in a stronger position when you do decide to play. With better hands, you can apply pressure more confidently and give yourself a real chance to win a meaningful pot. Each fold you make is part of that process. It keeps you out of trouble and saves your stack for spots where you're more likely to be ahead. Where you sit at the table also shapes which hands you should play. When you are in early position, you act before most of the table has had a chance to respond. That lack of information makes it the most challenging seat. In these seats, you want to play only your strongest hands. Premium pocket pairs and strong aces are the safest choices. You are facing several opponents who could wake up with better hands or put you in tough spots after the flop. From middle position, you've seen a few players act before you, but there are still others waiting behind. This extra information allows you to widen your range a little. Hands like suited Broadway cards become more attractive. You still need to be careful, but you have more flexibility than in early position. Late position gives you the most information. By the time the action reaches you, you've seen how most of the table has responded. This is often your best opportunity to play a wider range of hands. Marginal hands and speculative holdings can become playable, especially if there has not been much aggression. You can pick your spots, steal blinds, and control the flow of the hand more easily. Weak aces and low-suited connectors, though, are still risky from early seats. They are best saved for later positions, where you can see how the action unfolds. Being aware of your position and adjusting your hand selection accordingly helps you avoid difficult post-flop situations. It also lets you take advantage of favorable opportunities when they arise. The most successful players are always thinking about their seat and how it changes the value of their cards. Adapting your approach to match your position is a habit that tends to pay off over many sessions. The flow of the table itself also plays a big part in which hands you should play. At some tables, you will find players betting and raising often. This creates an aggressive environment. In these games, it is usually smart to tighten up and play only your best hands. Entering pots with weak holdings can get expensive fast when the action is heavy. Some players respond to aggression by 3-betting more often. That can work, but it requires a clear read on the table and a good sense of who you're up against. Other tables are much quieter. When players are mostly calling and rarely raising, you'll often find more room to play speculative hands. Suited connectors and small pairs become more valuable when you have the chance to see cheap flops and get paid off when you hit something big. Passive tables reward patience and allow you to pick off value from players who are just hoping to catch a good card. Stack sizes matter too. When you or your opponents are playing with short stacks, the value of speculative hands goes down. There is just not enough money behind to make chasing draws profitable. Premium hands gain even more value in these spots, since you can get all in more easily and realize your equity. When stacks are deep, there's generally more room to maneuver. Suited and connected hands tend to become more attractive in those spots, since they can win large pots when they connect in ways that are hard for opponents to read. The key is to watch your opponents and adjust your starting hand choices to fit the game you are in. Some tables will reward tight discipline. Others will let you open up and see more flops. The trick is to stay flexible without losing your core discipline. Let the game come to you. Don't chase every opportunity. That core discipline keeps your decisions grounded, no matter how the table shifts around you. As you settle into your seat and watch the cards go around, let your patience set the pace. Fold hands that are not worth your time. Wait for the ones that give you the best chance to win big pots. Over time, this steady, selective approach will shape your results. The chips may move back and forth in the short run, but your discipline will keep you on track. Let each hand be a quiet decision, building towards something larger than any single session. The game will slow, and you will find a rhythm that suits you. The strongest foundation you can build in poker is the habit of choosing wisely, one hand at a time. Chapter 12. Reading the board. Recognizing potential. 3 cards land face up, and before you think about your own hand, the board is already telling you something. The way those cards sit together shapes every decision that follows. Some flops look busy and dangerous. Others look scattered and calm. That difference shapes how many strong hands or draws are realistically possible for anyone at the table. A wet board tends to have cards close in rank or sharing suits. Those connections open up real possibilities for straights, flushes, and big combinations. On a wet board, you have to think not just about what you have, but about all the hands your opponents could be chasing. There are more ways for someone to be drawing to something strong. A dry board is the opposite. The cards are far apart in rank and don't share suits. There's not much to connect them. You are less likely to see big draws. Instead, the best hands tend to be top pair, overpairs, or sometimes even just high cards. When you see a dry board, you can usually narrow down the hands your opponents might have. Fewer combinations are possible, and you can often get a better sense of where you stand. Being able to read board texture helps you decide how to play your hand. On a wet board, you might want to protect your made hand with a bigger bet, or play more cautiously if you sense danger. On a dry board, you can sometimes take control with a smaller bet, or apply pressure, knowing that your opponents are less likely to have a strong draw. The key is to let the board guide your choices, rather than sticking to a fixed plan. As the hand continues, the arrangement of the community cards keeps changing. Each new card brings fresh possibilities and new threats. The flop is where most of the information comes in. When you see 3 suited cards, you know there could be flush draws in play. If the flop is paired, you have to consider sets or trips. Connected cards open up straight draws. It helps to understand how often these threats can actually happen. For example, a flush appears in roughly 3% of all 7-card hands. Straights are somewhat more common, showing up in roughly 4.5% of 7-card hands. If you're holding a pocket pair, you'll flop a set roughly 1 time in 8. These numbers aren't meant for exact math at the table. They're there to give you a rough sense of how likely certain hands actually are. On the turn, the board can shift again. A single card can complete a straight or bring a flush into play. If 2 suited cards were on the flop and a third shows up, flush draws become real threats. If the board was connected and another card falls in line, you have to consider straight possibilities. Each street adds new layers to the puzzle. The river is where draws either get there or miss. By this point, draws have either come in or missed. You want to watch for cards that complete obvious draws, and be ready to adjust your thinking if the final card changes the landscape. Recognizing when a flush or straight is now possible helps you avoid paying off a strong hand, or lets you value bet when you know your hand is still best. Reading the board well means staying alert to these shifts. You are not just thinking about your own hand, but about what your opponents could have. If you see a wet board, you expect more draws in your opponent's ranges. On a dry board, you expect more made hands. As each new card arrives, you update your sense of what is possible and what is likely. Now, let us look forward a little. Good players do not just react to the board. They think ahead to what could happen next. When you see a draw-heavy board, you want to imagine which cards could arrive on the turn or river to change the hand. If you have two suited cards, you know that your odds of completing a flush by the river are much better than with random cards. With an open-ended straight draw, you have roughly a 17% chance of completing it on the next card. A gut-shot straight draw is less likely, coming in at roughly 8% on the next card. Thinking ahead helps you plan your bets and your reactions. If you know a certain card will complete a big draw, you can prepare to slow down or bet for value, depending on whether you want to invite action or protect your stack. You do not need to predict every possible outcome. Instead, try to get in the habit of asking yourself what cards are dangerous and which ones help you. This is where adaptability comes in. The best players keep their plans flexible. They recognize that the board can change everything in a single moment. If a harmless-looking flop suddenly turns into a board full of draws, you must be ready to adjust. Sometimes the card you are hoping for arrives and you can play more aggressively. Other times, a scare card lands and you need to slow down or even let go of your hand. This kind of forward thinking takes practice to build. Over time, you will start to see patterns in how boards develop. You will sense when a turn card is likely to shift the action, or when the river might bring a surprise. This habit of anticipating and adapting will help you make better decisions, avoid costly mistakes, and spot opportunities that others miss. The board shifts with every card. That's not something to fight. It's something to follow. The more you pay attention to those shifts, the calmer your decisions tend to become. Patience and attention don't make the outcome certain. They just make the path a little clearer. Chapter 13: Exploiting Common Mistakes in Local Games. The patterns start to show up early. A player calls a large raise from early position with a hand that had no business being there. Another one chases a draw on the turn, even though the pot is not offering close to the right price. These are not random errors. You might see players call large pre-flop raises with hands that are not strong enough to justify the price. They will limp into pots or flat call raises, hoping to catch just the right flop. When the board comes out, they often chase draws without thinking through the odds. Some players call big bets with medium-strength hands, not realizing how often they are behind. These behaviors are not subtle. You will spot them as frequent calls, lots of limping, and players staying in pots with hands that do not belong there. The root of these errors is usually a misunderstanding of pot odds and hand value. In these local games, players often ignore this calculation entirely. They chase draws when the price is not right, especially in multi-way pots, where the math works even harder against them. You will also see players limp from early position with speculative hands and then call raises rather than folding, hoping for a miracle flop. The pattern is clear once you know what to look for. Another common mistake is overvaluing certain hands. Inexperienced players treat any suited cards or connected cards as golden tickets, calling big bets pre-flop because they like the look of their hand. After the flop, they are quick to call down with one pair or a weak kicker, believing it is enough to win. This tendency to stick with a hand for too long, especially after investing chips early, makes them easy targets for players who are willing to wait for real strength. You will also notice that when a player hits a medium-strength hand, they rarely fold to large bets, even if the board runs out in a way that makes their hand second best. Finally, there is the issue of passive play. Many local players prefer to call rather than raise, even when they have a decent hand. When faced with a raise, they flat call instead of re-raising, and this passivity lets opponents see cheap flops with a wide range of hands. The table often fills with limpers and callers. This leads to multi-way pots, where weak hands end up battling for modest chips. Once you start paying attention to these patterns, the opportunities to adjust your strategy become much clearer. When you see these mistakes happening, the best response is rarely to confront them directly or force action. Instead, patience becomes your greatest tool. Let your opponents overcommit with hands that are not strong enough. When you have a strong hand, betting for value is usually the right move. If you see someone repeatedly calling large bets with weak pairs or chasing draws without the right odds, you can increase your bet sizing to punish these calls. Thin value betting on later streets can be especially effective here, because these players will call off chips with hands that are clearly beaten. Position matters even more when your opponents are making these mistakes. If you are on the button or in late position, you get to act last and see how many players limp or call before you. When the field limps in, raising isolates the weaker hands and puts you heads up against players with wide ranges. This is where you want to be. When you find yourself in a pot with a passive player who limp called from early position, you can often take control of the hand and force them to play out of position with a weak range. If you notice the blinds are defended poorly, or players in the blinds call with almost any two cards, raise more often from late position. These players are often not protecting their blinds with strong hands. They will frequently call with hands that are dominated or easily outplayed after the flop. You can also take advantage of multi-way pots by betting your good hands for value, since you know your opponents will call too widely and chase draws without considering how the pot odds have shifted in a larger field. Sometimes you may want to slow play a premium hand against a player who never folds to a bet, but in most local games you will get more value by betting aggressively. Passive players tend to call large bets with weak hands, so there is rarely a good reason to give them free cards. Let them make the mistake of calling off their stack when you are ahead. The key is to focus on extracting value, not on trapping. As the session unfolds, the table will not stay the same. Players come and go, and the mood can shift. This is where observation and adaptability matter most. You need to watch which players limp most often, who likes to call raises, and who folds to aggression. When you see a player consistently calling pre-flop raises with weak hands, you can widen your value range and bet bigger for profit. If the table gets tighter and players start folding more, you can adjust by stealing more pots and playing more hands in position. Pay attention to who is always in multi-way pots. These players tend to overcommit with weak hands and call too loosely on later streets. When you spot this pattern, you can start betting thinner for value and be less concerned about being outdrawn. You are not playing against solid ranges. You are often playing against hands that had little reason to enter the pot. If you notice a player repeatedly making positional mistakes or playing too many hands from early position, raising more often can put them in uncomfortable spots. The more you watch, the more you will see how these errors open up opportunities for you to take control of the action. Every time you sit down the table offers new information. Let yourself notice the trends and be willing to shift your approach as the game changes. Patterns will emerge if you stay alert. With practice, you will find that adapting to these dynamics becomes second nature. The game slows down. You start to see the spots where the patient player finds the most opportunity. Let your decisions come from what you actually observe at the table. When you trust your read and make the right adjustments, the mistakes of others become the foundation for your own steady progress. Chapter 14. Adapting to game flow. Flexibility is key. The table has its own rhythm. Some nights it stays quiet and controlled for hours. Other nights, something changes, and the energy in the room is completely different. In Live 1-3, No Limit Texas Hold'em cash games, these changes in atmosphere are what many players call game flow. It is more than just the hands being dealt. It is the collective mood, the way players act, and the pace of action as the night goes on. This flow can shift for many reasons. Some of it comes from the mix of personalities at the table. Early on, the table might lean toward tighter, more aggressive play. As the hours pass, the mix can shift, and different tendencies start to shape how hands are contested. External events also play a role. When a big pot is played out, especially if there is an all-in or a dramatic bad beat, the atmosphere tends to shift. Players who are quiet might start talking more, or someone who lost a big hand might show signs of frustration. Even the time of day can matter. Early sessions might feel cautious, while later hours sometimes bring a more relaxed or reckless vibe. When a new player sits down, their style and energy can ripple through the whole table, shifting the way hands are played and how much risk people are willing to take. If you want to keep your edge in these games, it helps to stay aware of how these shifts in game flow affect decision-making. When you recognize that the table has become looser, tighter, more aggressive, or more cautious, you give yourself the chance to adjust before the rest of the table catches on. Over time, this awareness leads to better choices, and often better results. The first step is always observation. You want to watch for the subtle moments when things begin to change. Maybe you notice a player who usually calls suddenly starts raising more often. Sometimes the table talk shifts from quiet to lively, or a player who has been folding for an hour suddenly enters several pots in a row. These are often early signals that the game's flow is changing. If you catch these cues early, you'll often have a window to act before others have fully adjusted. It is not just about watching the cards. Pay attention to how people stack their chips. Notice how quickly they act. Listen to what they say between hands. A player who just lost a big pot might start playing more hands or betting larger amounts. That can sometimes be a sign their risk tolerance has shifted in the moment. Sometimes a new player joins, and the average pot size jumps, or the pace of play speeds up. These are all clues that should guide your next decisions. Being observant also means noticing when the table grows more passive. Maybe the action slows, and players seem less interested in building big pots. This can happen after a long, tense hand, or as the night gets late and people grow tired. If you spot these changes early, you can adjust your strategy before others even realize what is happening. Staying present and attentive keeps you a step ahead. Once you spot a shift, the next skill is adapting your playstyle to match. Flexibility tends to be what distinguishes players who hold their edge when the game shifts from those who struggle to keep up. If you see the table getting wild after a big hand, you might decide to tighten up, playing only strong starting hands and solid draws while avoiding marginal spots. When the table becomes cautious and pots shrink, you might open up your range a bit. taking advantage of fold equity with well-timed aggression. Adjusting your bet sizes is another way to align with the current flow. In a loose, chaotic game, larger bets can thin the field or pressure players who are chasing draws. In a tight, careful game, smaller bets might get more value from hands that would otherwise fold. You want to match your aggression level to the mood of the table. Sometimes that means ramping up to pressure timid players. Other times it means slowing down to avoid costly confrontations when the table is unpredictable. Modifying your hand selection is just as important. When you sense that many players are gambling or on tilt, it often makes sense to narrow your range, focusing on premium hands and strong draws. This can help protect your stack and gives you better chances to profit when opponents overplay weaker holdings. If the table is playing cautiously and pots are small, you can open up a bit more, looking for spots to steal blinds or pick up chips with less resistance. The real value of this flexible approach is that it lets you flow with the game, not against it. You are not just playing your cards anymore. You are playing the table itself, adjusting each decision based on what you see and feel in the moment. This habit of adjusting in real time can help build a more consistent edge over many sessions, even during stretches when the cards aren't running well. As you settle into the rhythm of the game, let yourself notice the small shifts in energy and pace. Flexibility is not just a tactic. It is a mindset that keeps you open to new opportunities and protects you from the pitfalls of stubbornness. The real story of the table isn't written only in the cards. It's written in the patterns of the people around you. When you are ready to look closer, you will find even more ways to adjust and thrive. The next step is learning to read those patterns in detail, one player at a time. Let your attention settle on the people around you. The flow of the game will do the rest. Chapter 15. Leveraging aggression, picking your spots. Most pots in a local 1-3 game are not won by the best hand. They are won by the player who takes the initiative. Taking the initiative means you are the one asking the questions at the table. You are betting and raising to shape the action, to build pots when you have an edge, and to pressure opponents when their holdings look uncertain. In these games, many players default to calling or checking, hoping to see cheap cards and catch something strong. This tendency opens the door for assertive players to take control and create profitable situations. When you use aggression as a proactive tool, you are not waiting for others to dictate the pace of play. You're the one asking the questions. Your opponents have to respond. By betting or raising, you can make your opponents face tough choices. If they are holding marginal hands or draws, they might fold and give up their equity rather than risk more chips. That is especially true in local 1-3 games, where players often dislike facing big bets on later streets. When you apply steady pressure, you make it harder for them to see free cards and realize their potential. Aggression also lets you seize the initiative in pots where you have the upper hand. Building the pot with strong hands means you can win bigger when your opponents call with weaker holdings. At the same time, selective aggression can exploit the tendencies you will often find in these games. Many opponents are happy to call pre-flop, but fold to continued pressure after the flop. Over time, this dynamic lets you capture more pots and steadily grow your stack. Staying active in pots opens up opportunities that passive play tends to miss. You can take down pots when opponents fold, or build value when they call behind with weaker hands. The goal isn't to be aggressive on every street of every hand. It means picking your moments and using assertive play to drive the action. When you do, you may find that opponents struggle to adjust, and your results tend to improve over time. The key to making aggression work is knowing when and how to apply it. Picking your spots comes down to reading the table and weighing several factors together. Start by watching your opponents closely. Notice who plays many hands, but rarely raises. These players are generally good targets for pressure, since they tend to fold more often when the bets get bigger. On the other hand, watch out for players who call down with any pair or chase draws no matter the price. Against these players, aggression is less likely to force folds, so you want to focus on value betting instead. Your position at the table plays a big role in the effectiveness of aggression. Acting last tends to give you more information about what your opponents might be holding and how they're likely to respond. When you are in late position, you can see how the action unfolds before deciding whether to ramp up the pressure. Early position is trickier, since you act with less information and face more potential resistance. In general, the later your position, the more you can leverage aggression to your advantage. Stack sizes also matter. When you and your opponents have deep stacks, there is more room to apply pressure across multiple streets. You can size your bets to threaten larger portions of their stack, making their decisions more difficult. With shorter stacks, your options for aggressive play become more limited, and the risk of running into a big hand increases. Always weigh the size of the pot and the stacks behind, before committing to a series of bets or raises. Timing is just as important as observation. Some players tighten up after losing a big pot, while others tilt and start calling down with anything. Watch for these shifts and adjust your approach. The best moments for aggression often come when you see opponents playing cautiously or folding to heat in recent hands. Make a habit of noting these patterns and waiting for the right time to strike, rather than forcing the action when the conditions are not right. Whenever you are thinking about an aggressive play, take a moment to weigh the risk and the reward. Aggressive moves can win pots outright by making opponents fold, or they can build bigger pots when you have the best of it. But every bet you make is a commitment of chips, and sometimes the board, the action, or the player types mean you will not get the folds you want. The balance comes from choosing spots where the potential gain is greater than the likely loss. Managing the inevitable losses is part of staying effective at the table. In local 1-3 games, you will face players who do not fold as often as you hope. When this happens, it helps to size your bets so that you maintain pressure without risking more than you can afford to lose. If you get called by a stubborn opponent, focus on extracting value when you do have the best hand, rather than trying to force folds every time. Aggressive play does more than just win pots. It shifts the momentum of the table. When you put pressure on passive players, some tend to tighten up and fold more often. Others can get frustrated and make costly mistakes, calling off chips with weak hands or chasing draws at poor prices. Over time, this shift can work in your favor, as some opponents become more predictable and easier to read. Not every player will adjust quickly. In low-stakes games, many people play the same way regardless of what happens around them. Even so, your willingness to drive the action will often put you one step ahead. The more you pay attention and adjust your aggression to the situation, the more control you have over your results. Settle into the rhythm of the table. Watch for the moments when the game slows, when the other players hesitate, or when the mood shifts. Those are often the best moments to lean in. Each well-timed bet or raise does more than build a pot. It shapes the game around you. Stay patient, stay attentive, and the table will keep showing you when the time is right. Chapter 16, Endgame Tactics, Closing the Deal. The table feels different late in a session. The energy shifts. Players who were splashing chips earlier start pulling back, and the ones who took a hit start doing things they would not have done 3 hours ago. You can feel the tension in the pace of the game, in how long people take before acting, and in the size of the bets coming from unexpected spots. Some will tighten up, protecting their winnings, while others may grow impatient or desperate to get even before the game breaks. The end of a session brings out these tendencies more clearly than any other stage. This is when your ability to adapt really matters. While you might have started the night with a certain approach, you cannot expect to finish it the same way if you want to maximize profit. Instead, try to pay close attention to the mood of the table. Watch for signs that a player who was active earlier is now folding more often. Someone who just lost a big pot might start raising aggressively in rapid succession. These shifts are often visible in bet sizing, the frequency of raises, or how quickly someone acts. The player who suddenly starts calling every hand after a long stretch of folding is telling you something important about their mindset. Your own position at the table becomes even more valuable in these late hours. Acting after your opponents lets you see if they are playing cautiously or if they are ready to gamble. You'll want to open up your range a little when you're in late position and the table is showing signs of fatigue or frustration. If you see others starting to make mistakes, that's your chance to press the advantage. If the table is tightening up and pots are getting smaller, look for selective spots to steal blinds or pick up uncontested pots. That's especially useful when you're sitting on the button or cutoff. Flexibility is your strongest asset here. The more you can adjust to what is happening in real time, the better you will exploit both the cautious and the reckless tendencies of your opponents. Fatigue and frustration tend to play a larger role than many players expect. As the session drags on, some players lose focus. They may start to make snap decisions, play too many hands, or chase losses with wild bets. Others will go the opposite way, folding everything as they try to lock up what they have won. Both types offer opportunities if you are watching closely. Look for subtle signs like a sigh, a slump in posture, or a chip stack that suddenly swings in either direction. When you see these, you can adjust your tactics to take advantage without exposing yourself to unnecessary risk. Once you have a sense of the table's mood and your likely image, you can use that reputation to shape the action in your favor. Maybe you've played tight for most of the night, showing down only strong hands. Now, as the session nears its end, your opponents may be ready to believe your big bets. That makes it a good time to pick your spots for a well-timed bluff. If you choose the right moment, you can get folds from hands that would have called earlier. On the other hand, if you have been active and aggressive, you might find that your bets get called more often. In that case, you will want to focus on value betting your strong hands and avoid running bluffs into stubborn opponents. Good bluffing in the endgame is all about timing and the story you tell. Use your table image as a tool. If you have been quiet, a sudden show of strength can be convincing. If you are known for mixing it up, you will need to pick your targets carefully and make sure your bets fit the narrative of a strong hand. Bluffing with hands that block your opponent's likely calling ranges can tilt the odds in your favor, since you make it less likely they have the right cards to call. For example, if you hold cards that would complete a possible straight or flush, your bluff looks more credible, and your opponent is less likely to have those combinations. Bet sizing also plays a big role in your endgame strategy. Consistent, balanced bet sizes can make it harder for observant opponents to read your hand strength. That gives you a better chance of getting more value from your strong hands and more folds when you're bluffing, especially if you've established a pattern earlier in the session. When you do decide to bluff, make sure your bets tell a consistent story from the flop through the river. A triple barrel bluff works best when your actions fit the story of a value hand, and you hold blocker cards that make it less likely your opponent holds a strong calling hand. As the session draws to a close, your focus should shift toward protecting your stack. This does not mean you stop playing altogether. Instead, you want to be more selective about which pots you contest. Marginal hands that might have been worth a call earlier should often go in the muck now. Folding these hands reduces your variance and helps you maintain a profitable stack, especially when you have already reached a target win for the night. There will be times when you will want to tighten up, especially if you are facing unpredictable or emotional opponents. If someone at your table is clearly on tilt or chasing losses, you do not want to get caught up in unnecessary confrontations with marginal holdings. Let them make the mistakes. You can widen your value range a bit when you have position and a strong hand, but avoid getting drawn into wild pots just because someone else is losing control. It is better to protect what you have won than to risk it chasing one more big score. Discipline is often what separates steady winners from players who give back their profits late in a session. When you reach your profit goal, it's wise to avoid high-variance situations that could jeopardize your results. Profit locking gives you a way to step away with your winnings intact and your confidence high. The psychological benefit of ending a session ahead tends to be significant for most players. It builds your resilience and makes it easier to come back next time with a clear head. Let the pace of the table slow you down as the night winds in. Stay attentive and keep your decisions measured. Let the other players show you where the last opportunities are. There's a quiet satisfaction in leaving with both your stack and your focus intact. That habit of discipline carries further than any single session ever could. Chapter 17. Learning from every session. Most players walk away from a session without ever really processing what happened. They count their chips, head for the door, and leave whatever they learned sitting on that table. Making time to look back on each session is something many casual players skip, but those who want to improve tend to treat it as a regular part of their poker process. This habit is not about finding reasons to be hard on yourself. Instead, it is about seeing where you made sound choices and where you might have missed something. When you review your play, you start to notice the moments where your decisions did not line up with your intentions. Maybe you folded a hand you planned to call, or you made a bet that was too large or too small for the spot. These are the details that often slip by during the heat of the game. By looking back, you catch them before they become habits. As you go through this process, you might find that the same types of mistakes come up again and again. Perhaps you notice that you are often too cautious in certain spots. Or maybe you are missing value by not betting enough with strong hands. Sometimes it is about failing to read the table correctly, or letting your emotions push you toward a risky call. These recurring issues are the leaks that quietly drain your stack over time, if you leave them unaddressed. The act of reviewing your sessions is what helps turn these blind spots into clear targets for improvement. You move from making unconscious mistakes to spotting them as they happen, and that is the first step toward playing more deliberately. Beyond just finding errors, regular analysis reveals the opportunities you might have missed. Maybe you realize that a particular spot was perfect for a thin value bet, or that you could have picked up a pot with a well-timed bluff. Seeing these moments after the fact helps you recognize them the next time they appear. Over many sessions, this kind of reflective practice does more than fix mistakes. It builds your awareness, sharpens your instincts, and helps you make better choices when the stakes are real. Players who make this a habit tend to be the ones who keep moving forward. To make your reviews more effective, it helps to build a simple system. One of the simplest and most valuable tools is a poker journal. After each session, take a moment to write down the basics, the stakes you played, how much you bought in for, and how much you left with, and how long you played. Then, add a few notes about the table conditions. Was the table loose or tight? Were there any players who stood out? Finally, jot down any hands that left you uncertain or uncomfortable. These are often the hands that teach you the most, especially when you look back with a clear head. Many players also use digital tools to help with this process. Hand tracking software allows you to record every hand you play, so you don't have to rely on memory alone. Over time, these tools can show you detailed patterns in your play. You can see how often you're entering pots, how aggressively you're betting, and whether your choices line up with your intended strategy. Some programs track statistics, like how often you're entering pots voluntarily, or how frequently you're raising before the flop, helping you spot trends that are hard to notice on your own. The goal isn't to drown in numbers. It's to use those details to guide your own assessment. Whether you prefer a notebook or a computer, the key is consistency. By making notes after every session, you'll have a clear record to look back on. Over time, you will see patterns that are hard to spot in the moment. Did you play too many hands from early position? Did your bet sizing drift as you got tired? Did tilt creep in after a tough hand? These are the kinds of questions that a journal or tracking tool can help answer. The more honest you are with yourself, the more useful your notes become. That honesty turns vague impressions into real information you can act on. As you build up a record of your sessions, you will start to notice recurring patterns in both your play and the play of others. Maybe you see that you tend to call too often against certain types of opponents, or you realize that your aggression drops off when you are out of position. You might also notice trends at the table, like players who fold too often to bets, or opponents who play too many hands from early position. These patterns are not always obvious in a single night, but they become clear when you review several sessions together. Recognizing these trends is what allows you to make targeted adjustments. If you find that you are facing a lot of 3-bets when you raise from the button, you can spend time studying those spots and planning new responses. If you see that certain opponents always call down light, you can shift your value betting strategy to take advantage. The process is ongoing. Each session adds another layer to your understanding, and each adjustment brings you a little closer to your goals. The real value of this approach is that it keeps you moving forward, even when progress feels slow. Small changes add up over time, and each lesson you learn becomes part of your foundation. Players who embrace this mindset tend not to expect overnight results. They trust in the process, and they treat each session as a chance to learn something useful. That kind of steady commitment is often what separates players who improve from those who stay stuck. Let yourself settle into this habit at your own pace. Once the table clears and the noise settles, take a quiet moment to look back. With each session you review, you're not only learning from your mistakes, you're building the skills that carry you forward. Over time, you may find the game feels a little slower, your choices a little clearer, and each step a little more deliberate. This is how real progress is made, one session at a time. Chapter 18: Developing a long-term winning strategy. There is a kind of player you will recognize after enough sessions. They do not look satisfied after a big win, and they do not look defeated after a losing night. Something else is driving them, and it shows in the way they carry themselves from one game to the next. That steady improvement tends to come from looking at the game with a particular attitude. It is the kind of mindset that sees every challenge as a chance to learn rather than a roadblock. If you can welcome setbacks as opportunities to develop your skills, you will find yourself building a kind of resilience that carries you through the swings of live play. You are not just hoping to run well or avoid mistakes. You are trying to get a little better each time you sit down. The players who tend to last in local cash games are usually the ones who stay curious long after the session ends. They bring what they have learned back to the table, and they do not stop there. They look for patterns across many sessions, not just one night. That broader view is what turns isolated improvements into something lasting. If you want to stay ahead, it helps to seek out feedback and be open to new ideas, even if it means questioning your routines. Some of the biggest leaps come from listening to others, whether that is a trusted friend, a coach, or simply someone who sees the game from a different angle. When you stay curious, you give yourself room to adapt. Habits that worked last month may not be enough anymore. Staying open to change is what keeps your game moving forward. The game keeps changing, and so do the people who play it. When you stay curious and keep looking to learn, you tend to find a way forward, even when things get tough. A player with this kind of mindset does not let a rough stretch define the session. They keep the longer arc in view and stay grounded in what the game is actually teaching them. Over time, this approach makes the game less about chasing short-term results and more about building a foundation for steady success. When you focus on growth, you put yourself in a stronger position to handle whatever the table brings. As you gain experience, you will see that the room itself is never the same from one night to the next. Some sessions you will find a table full of loose callers. Other times you will be surrounded by players who seem to raise and re-raise every chance they get. These shifts are part of what makes live cash games so interesting and so challenging. The players who win over the long term are usually those who notice these changes and are quick to adjust their approach. You might find yourself in a game where the players behind you are calling almost every raise. In this case, it often pays to narrow the range of hands you choose to play, focusing on the ones that do well in multi-way pots. At the same time, hands that might be marginal in a tighter lineup can become more valuable when you know you will see the flop with several opponents who are willing to pay you off when you hit. If you notice that one or two players are particularly sticky, calling down with weak hands, you might adjust by betting larger for value and cutting back on your bluffs. There will be sessions where aggression takes over the table. You will see players 3-betting light, betting big on the flop, and putting pressure on every street. Against these opponents, you might find it more profitable to call with a wider range and let them hang themselves when you have a strong hand. Trying to out-bluff a habitual bluffer tends to backfire, so patience and careful trapping are often your most reliable options. The key to all of this is observation. Watch how often players limp, how they size their bets, and how quickly they act. Over time, you will pick up patterns that help you make better decisions. The more you notice, the easier it becomes to adjust your strategy in real time. If you can stay flexible and respond to new trends, you give yourself a better chance of holding your edge as the games evolve. Between the shifting tables and the constant adjustments, it's easy to lose sight of where you're headed. This is where setting clear, realistic goals comes in. Knowing what you are working toward makes it easier to stay focused during long stretches of play. You might want to improve your win rate by a certain number of big blinds per 100 hands. Or you might want to focus on a specific area of your game that keeps costing you chips. Whatever the goal, writing it down and checking your progress keeps you moving in the right direction. It is important to revisit your goals from time to time. As you improve or as the games shift, you may find that your original targets are no longer the right fit. Maybe you need to aim higher, or maybe you need to stay patient and give yourself more time. This process of reassessment helps you stay honest about where you stand and what still needs work. By breaking your journey into short-term and long-term objectives, you give yourself milestones to celebrate and a structure for ongoing improvement. Some players find that process goals carry more weight than outcome targets. Focusing on specific decision points, rather than results, keeps your attention on the things you can actually shape. Over the course of many sessions, that focus tends to show up in the numbers. Of all the habits that carry you forward, patience and discipline tend to matter most. It takes time to see real growth. There will be nights when nothing goes your way, and the temptation to chase losses or force the action will be strong. If you can sit back, trust your process, and keep making steady decisions, you give yourself a real chance to build something that lasts. Long-term success is not about a single big win or a hot streak. It is about stacking small improvements, one decision at a time, until the game slows down and your confidence grows. Let yourself settle into this quieter rhythm. Each session becomes a step forward, no matter what the cards bring. When you approach the game with patience, curiosity, and a willingness to adapt, you will find that the path to steady profit is not a sprint, but a calm, deliberate walk through the changing landscape of live poker.